Killian Hayes unexpectedly went from a draft bust to suddenly becoming good. After having a lack of success in his first 2 seasons, most people completely gave up on Killian, as not only was he having a lack of success, but he even wasn't showing all that many flashes of what he could potentially be. But so far this season, although it hasn't been the most consistent, Killian is finally starting to show some flashes in certain games of what he could potentially be going forward long term, and due to this, he's finally starting to get his career going in the right direction. But quickly before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy Sports. I make opinionated NBA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. I also want to quickly mention that I recently started up an MMA channel, and if you guys are interested in that, the link will be in the description. But anyways, let's get into it. Killian Hayes was drafted with the number 7 overall selection during the 2020 NBA draft by the Detroit Pistons. And originally when he was being drafted, there was a ton to like about this guy. He was the type of player that had a really nice understanding of basketball, had a nice ability to run an offense, run crisp offensive sets, get his teammates open looks, had a great ability to run the pick and roll or pick and pop, and even besides that, had a pretty decent ability to create for himself as well. But although there was a ton to like about Killian, there was some concerns as well. And probably the main concern about him coming into the NBA was his inconsistency. Now, when you talk about young players, especially young point guards, a lot of times they do struggle with inconsistency. And typically those kind of players are seen as projects. And when you talk about Killian, especially due to the fact that he was coming from overseas, obviously he was going to be seen as somewhat of a project coming into the league. But once Killian started to play for the Pistons, he didn't look all that impressive in his rookie season. In his rookie year, he only averaged 6.8 points per game on 2.7 boards and 5.3 assists. Now, during his rookie season, he was dealing with injuries as he only played 26 games that year, but also when you consider people expected him to be a project coming into the NBA, it wasn't necessarily a surprise. But with that being said, after watching his rookie year, people weren't all that high on him. Because although they were expecting a project with Killian, when you actually watched him out there, he didn't really show all that many flashes at all. And typically when you talk about players that are projects that could potentially turn into really good players, in their early years, you don't necessarily expect them to be consistent or play all that well, but you would like to see some flashes from them in certain games or certain stretches of games. But when you talk about Killian, he wasn't really showing that whatsoever, to be honest. Now, some of that could have been attributed to the lack of opportunity due to injuries, but either way, people weren't all that high on him after his rookie season. But fast forwarding to his second year, things didn't get all that much better for him, as he averaged 6 points per game on 3.2 rebounds per game and 4.2 assists. Very similar numbers to his rookie year, maybe even a little bit worse. So obviously after his second season, people were starting to give up on this guy. And it did start to feel like his career was somewhat in jeopardy, because it was pretty clear when watching him out there that he just completely lost all his confidence. And this is something that I talk about in a lot of my videos, but confidence is extremely important for NBA players, especially young point guards, because if you have a ton of confidence, you're probably going to play better than your talent would suggest. But on the other hand, if you completely lose your confidence, it's going to be very difficult to get it back, but in the meantime, you're probably going to be playing significantly worse than your talent would suggest. And in Killian's first 2 seasons, that's exactly what we were seeing from him. He wasn't looking confident when looking for his own jump shot, he wasn't looking confident when running an NBA offense, and overall, he just seemed a little bit lost out there, to be honest. And a lot of the things that he did well that got him drafted number 7 overall were just not showing up whatsoever so far, at that point at least, in his career with the Pistons. But fortunately for Killian, after his second season, he went to work. He put in a ton of hard work into his game during that offseason, and coming into this year, he looks like a different player. This season, he's averaging 10 points per game on 2.8 rebounds on 6.2 assists. Now, when you compare those numbers to what he was doing previous, it doesn't necessarily seem like he made a significant improvement. But when you watch him out there, it is pretty clear that Killian is a lot more confident out there, and in certain games, we see flashes of what Killian could potentially be going forward long long term. In certain games, he's doing a great job at scoring for himself, looking very confident out there with his jump shot. In other games, he's doing a great job at facilitating for others, getting his teammates easy looks, and in other games, he does a great job at putting both of those things together and having a very complete game out there. And although Killian still at this point isn't looking all that consistent out there, at least he's showing something now. Because when you talk about young players, especially young point guards, it's probably going to be a difficult transition to the NBA. So what you can expect from these guys is just to see consistent improvement season after season. And although we didn't necessarily see an improvement from year 1 to year 2, from year 2 to year 3 we have seen an improvement, and at this point he has something to build off of. If he can finish off the season this year strong and have that confidence going into next season, and then next season he improves even more and just continues to improve season after season, then you could talk about a player that really steered his career back on the right path. And to be honest, at this point I do think he has pretty good potential. I think in the long-term future, Killian could be a legitimate starting point guard, averaging around 15 points and 7 assists per game. Now, whether or not that ends up being with the Pistons is remained to be seen, but in terms of his potential and his talent level, and assuming everything does go right and he improves season after season over the long-term future, I do think he could potentially live up to those expectations as the years do progress. But at the end of the day, I think the main thing that will determine whether or not Killian does live up to expectations, or at least those expectations, would be based on his confidence. If Killian can finish the year strong this year and have a ton of confidence going into next year, and get a little bit better next year, have a ton of confidence again going into the season after, and just continue to go in that cycle, I do think he can get to that point. But if Killian completely starts to lose his confidence, I think his career can go right back in the wrong direction, and we could see a much similar version of Killian than we did in his first 2 seasons as compared to in his third. But I think that's a story with a lot of young players. Confidence is extremely important. But now, what are my expectations for the Detroit Pistons as a whole? Now, when you look at the roster, it is pretty clear that they're a rebuilding team. They're one of the worst teams in the NBA once again, but when you look at their actual roster, they do have a lot of talent on it. They have guys like Jaden Ivey, James Wiseman, Cade Cunningham, Jalen Duren, Marvin Bagley, Isaiah Stewart, RJ Hampton. There's just a ton of different guys that have potential going forward long term. Now, obviously the main 2 guys that they're going to be focused on are both Jaden Ivey and Cade Cunningham, but I do think if a guy like Killian Hayes does come into his own, that would only benefit the Pistons. Because if the Pistons decide they have too many point guards on their roster, they can move on from Killian or one of the other 2 guys if they want. But if Killian is at a much higher level than he was previous and you move on from him, then you can get more in return for him than you otherwise would have. But if you want to keep Killian on your roster, then perfect. Now you have a nice young point guard that's improving season after season, and it's only going to benefit your team. But overall, I do think the Pistons have a lot of different nice young players that do have great potential going forward long term, and if you have a bunch of those guys, eventually that's going to make your team better, and I do in turn think the Pistons are going to be a pretty decent team in the long-term future. But they just need to continue to draft effectively, make sure the young players they already have on the roster continue to improve their game, and eventually success is going to come. It's only going to be a matter of time. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Killian Hayes has a chance to turn his career around, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these 2 videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.